thing that baffles me about the 80s or the 90s or whatever you want to call when basketball was so much more physical is some of the guys that be talking weren't the guys that was punching people. You know, like they act like guys was just walking around the court like I'm hitting this guy in the nose. There were a few guys back then that would lay you out, that would knock you out, that would foul you and get thrown out the game. Bill Laimbeer, Rick Mahorn, but everybody running around acting like they were that. Y'all were getting bullied, like like, and so it baffles me when every guy just because they played in the '80s, just because they played in the '90s, is like, man, if you played in our day, you get knocked out. Like, no, not really, because it wouldn't be you. So, okay, you saying Rick Mahorn would have knocked me out. Rick Mahorn probably knocks you out. Like, Bill Laimbeer probably lays you out. So, were there enforcers of that time? Of course. Would they have knocked you out? Of course. Their fine was also $2. Like, it's just not the same day and age. If I go knock somebody out, I probably get fined $1 million. Like, it just don't work the same. And so, when guys get to making these comparisons or talking about, oh, if you played in this day and age, like, yeah. And if you played in this day and age, you would have had to be way more skilled than you were.
All right, a lot to unpack here. JJ Redick joining the debate. Good to have you. Mad Dog, I want to start with you because you're the historian.
Why not? I'll have fun with it.
So, right? Are you buying what Dre said?
Well, first off, let's be fair. And I saw the team play all the games.
Okay.
Draymond Green would not play on the 86 Celtics. He wouldn't play. He's not going to play over Bird. He's not playing over McHale. He's not playing over Parrish. He's not playing over Bill Walton. And he's not playing over Scott Wedman. So he wouldn't even play. He'd be on a team.
Over Scott?
Wedman was a great shooter. I don't think he's even playing over him. And he's certainly not playing in the backcourt with DJ, Ainge, and people like, and Gerald Henderson and people like that. He wouldn't be on a team. He'd barely be on a team. Let's call it like we see. The NBA is so much different than it was then because there was the physicality aspect, big front lines. You think he's going to play in the 87 Lakers when they got, or 85 Lakers with Wilkes, Worthy, Kareem, and McAdoo? And Michael Thompson, and then Byron Scott and Magic in the backcourt. He wouldn't be on a team. He just wouldn't play. So because he's physical, but in those days they were rugged. They never called fouls. The game was much more centered in the paint because there wasn't a lot of three-point shooting. So they had 10 big bodies on a smaller scale. And the officials, a lot of times there weren't 3 officials. There was only 2 officials. So a lot more things went by. So listen, I'm not saying it's better basketball, but it's different basketball. And the way Green plays with his physicality and his size, these teams they're much better. He just wouldn't be a factor. Even the Detroit team, the Detroit team with Rodman, with John Sally, with Laimbeer and Aguirre, and with Isaiah and Dumars and James Edwards. Where is he playing on that team? He's not better than Rodman. He's not better than Sally. Sally was 7 foot tall. He's not better than James Edwards, who could score. He's not better than Laimbeer. He's not better than Mark Aguirre. So, and they were physical, banged and bruised. So the 80s, I'm not saying it's better basketball as far as the style of play, but the players were unbelievably they were very, very good. And Green is not on that level from a talent perspective or a physical standpoint that he can play in a team. I don't know if JJ would disagree probably, but I'm telling you right now, he wouldn't play in the 86 Celtics.
Oh, Lord.
He playing the 86 Celtics?
No, I agree with you there, but I still am disgusted that, I like sparring. I'm sorry, my mic fell off. I apologize. I like sparring with JJ Redick. I love to disagree with JJ Redick. I love for JJ Redick to come at me so I can school him sometimes when he needs to be schooled. And you got me here, doggy, agreeing with JJ Redick. I mean, I just finished arguing with him about this stuff on Get Up, but you took it to a whole nother level with the disrespect to Draymond Green. You brought up 2 of the elite teams in the game of basketball. Let me finish. You're right. I apologize. You did say 3. What I'm saying to you is this. The game was different then. Front lines were bigger. There was a level of physicality that's allowed or whatever. That doesn't mean you turn around and disrespect Draymond Green by not highlighting the change in today's game, his movement of foot, his quickness as a defensive player, his basketball IQ, and what a basketball savant and a brilliant basketball player he is in today's generation. The fact of the matter is the game has changed. I don't fault the players. When I call the game soft, JJ, for example, I'm not talking about the players. Look at how big and athletic and strong a lot of these players are. And look at how gifted most of these players are. And obviously, JJ was right when you point out the game has been changed for the better from an offensive perspective. What I lament is the fact that every little thing is called. And because the players are smart enough to know how the game is called today, they try to capitalize off of that in a way that makes the game seem so much softer. I'm not talking about the physicality of the players themselves and what they're capable of. I'm talking about what the game is disallowed, how the players gravitate towards that, and try to milk it to such a degree that on far too many occasions we're looking at dudes that could be acting in Top Gun, for crying out loud, starring J.J. Redick. That's what I'm lamenting. I'm in no way trying to say that a player, and nor do I believe that today's player should be disrespected like they couldn't compete in that era physically, capability-wise, in terms of their athletic prowess and the gift that they have on a basketball court. I'm talking about the game being called softer and players trying to capitalize off of that in a way that never would have been allowed back in the 80s and to some degree in the 90s. That's all I mean by that. JJ, the floor is yours.
Stephen, I pledged to myself in the 55, 57 minutes that I've had off since Get Up that I'm going to be much calmer in this debate. And if I took it over the top on Get Up, I apologize to you.
No,
it's all in good fun.
my brother.
It's all in good fun.
It's all in fun, man. We're just having a good time.
There's a few things I just want to unpack here. So you sort of brought this up, and one of the things that I think should be sort of stated and acknowledged is that players are very smart, and players have been intelligent. The best players have been intelligent since the beginning of the NBA. And what do players do? They respond to the rules of their era, and they look to take advantage of the rules of their era. So in a more physical era like the 1980s, when fighting was predominantly allowed, there wasn't as much of a deterrent to fight. The suspensions, the fines weren't as significant. They fought. In the 1990s, hand checking was allowed. Of course, a guy like Gary Payton or Derek Harper, they're going to engage in that rule and use it to their advantage. In today's game, because of the rules centering on allowing a more free-flowing game and a more free-flowing offense, players are going to respond to that. They're going to try to accentuate contact when they're the offensive player. As a defensive player, your hands are sort of tied behind your back, so you're going to accentuate when the offensive player gives you a little nudge. That's just trying to take advantage of the rules of their era. On the point about Draymond, and I'm going to get to Draymond in a second, on the point about Draymond, I would just say this. Each era of basketball, there is a philosophy around how you're going to play. And that philosophy is largely based on the talent and skill set of the best players. And so when you have an era where the philosophy is built around big guys and centers like the 90s, that offensive philosophy is going to flow through them. When you have an era where players have developed the skill set to shoot efficient pull-up three-pointers from 35 feet, like Steph Curry and Trae Young and Damian Lillard, then you're going to try to give them the space required to shoot those threes or get downhill and make plays. That's just the evolution of the game over and over and over. In reference to Draymond saying players in the 80s or the 90s when it was more physical, and it was more physical, they needed to be more skilled. I don't think he's wrong in saying that. And some of it is probably the pushback on that message is the messenger, right? We don't think of Draymond as like this incredibly skilled offensive player, but as Stephen A. so eloquently put, Draymond is incredibly intelligent. He's one of period. He's one of the best defenders in the NBA, in the history of the NBA, period. And he is skilled in the sense that he understands how to manipulate defenses because of the way that he moves the ball, because of the way that he screens for a guy like Steph Curry. Dre and I have talked about this before. When you look at the three of them, the big three for the Warriors, Klay Thompson, Steph Curry, and Draymond Green, all three of them would be great players in the NBA had they not played together. But their skill sets complement each other so well that they have elevated each other to elite status. All three will be in the Hall of Fame someday. You bring up the 86 Celtics, though, like you bring up one of the 5 best teams ever with one of the greatest front courts ever. That's unfair to Draymond to say that he couldn't. Hold on.
I'm talking about eras. This is the best Golden State era team. So I'm bringing up a team from the 80s that was the best team in the 80s. He's not on the.
But you're not comparing the same thing, because you're talking about a team where the philosophy and the skill set was based around one of the greatest front courts of all time. I'm saying that's unfair to Draymond to say that he couldn't play in that era.
He wouldn't play.
Because
he wouldn't be on that team. He wouldn't make the team.
Most people wouldn't.
Who is he playing over?
But
what time goes for?
He's not. That's my point. It's unfair. But you said he couldn't play in that era. You said he couldn't play in that era.
That team, he wouldn't be nearly as big a factor in that era. They were all big and physical.
Fine. I'm agreeing with you that he maybe wouldn't have a big impact on that team because of, you're talking about in a vacuum, one of the greatest front courts ever on one of the greatest teams of all time.
Right.
Yeah, Draymond Green may not play 35 minutes on that team. I agree with you there. But I believe I heard you right when you said he couldn't play in that era, and then you named one other team.
2 other teams. The Lakers and Detroit.
The Pistons and the Lakers.
The Lakers and the Celtics. Okay. That's 3.
Prior to expansion, there was 24 teams in the NBA, so he's going to probably find a spot on 21.
You know, remember, you had to be a better player in those days because there's only 24 players, there's less jobs. So you had to be a better basketball player.
But that's you're making the assumption there that players today aren't better, aren't more skilled, aren't more advanced in sort of philosophical
fundamentally, they're not as good.
Ideologies about basketball.
Fundamentally, they're not as good. Because back in those days, Tim Duncan played 4 years in college basketball. These guys don't play 4 years in college basketball. Fundamentally, not nearly as good as the days.
What game are you watching today, Chris? Honestly, what game are you watching?
You think anybody's better fundamental player than Larry Bird? You think anybody is a better fundamental player than Larry Bird?
You're bringing up a top 10 player of all time.
You're bringing up
I'm talking about the average NBA player.
Right. Okay.
The average NBA player today, you're saying, is not more skilled than a player in the 80s.
So he's got better athlete.
Well, what are fundamentals then? Fundamentals are your
knowing how to play, get good shots, boxing out, taking what the defense gives you. All those things. Well, you didn't see the teams.
I'll let you
play.
Let me chime in. Let me chime in, guys.
Let you jump in here, Stephen A. I'll let you jump in here, Stephen A. In 1 second. I just want to repeat. I just want to repeat one thing that I said, and this was my main point on Get Up, Stephen. And again, I apologize for raising my voice to you and Green.
Oh, please.
My main point on Get Up was this: you guys, old heads.
I agree. 100%.
Old heads.
I'm going to go the old
have
way.
watched the game.
Them older than me.
Yes, I know. Have watched the game in person for decades. Again, I only have the luxury of modern technology.
But you play. That's the advantage you have.
I've watched enough basketball on YouTube in the 80s and the 70s and 60s. Like to have some basis idea. I've studied Basketball Reference. I know what shot profiles looked like in the 80s. I know what pace was in the 60s versus the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. Like I look at this stuff all day, Chris. I look at this stuff all day. I did not have the luxury of watching in person a 1986 NBA Finals. Okay? I'm at fault there. Right. But my point is
reality.
The nostalgic standard that all of you have set for the 80s and the 90s NBA, for some reason, and it just really happened in the last 15 years, and maybe it's 24/7 news programming, maybe it's social media, I don't know. But all of a sudden, in every sport, players continue to get better, but for some reason in the NBA,
I need to chime in.
Players in the last 15 years, like, we're just not good enough.
Hold on, time out. Let me chime in.
Product.
Hold on, JJ.
That's what it feels like to me.
Hold on, JJ.
I disagree with you, but fair.
Hold on, guys. It's my turn. Let me cap this conversation. First of all, Doggy, JJ Redick is right with what he is saying. To bring up Boston, to bring up LA and their championship squad, to bring up Detroit, and then to use that to sit up there and talk about what Draymond can't do is unfair to Draymond Green. There's a whole bunch of people that couldn't be on those 3 particular teams. Okay, including people that were in the league in the 80s. Most dudes in the 80s couldn't be on those teams. Okay, that's number one. Number two, one of the things you're pointing to, you pointed to size. and you pointed shooting. That's not what Draymond's not the biggest dude in the world. He's walking around like 6'6", 6'7" at best, and he clearly is not a shooter. And so when you bring up the fact that the game was slower then, they were big, you had big lineups in your front court, okay? Physicality was allowed, plus you had dudes that would shoot. Of course, considering the makeup of the NBA at that particular time, that may not have been ideal for Draymond. But look at what he's doing today. You can't take away from that. Now, JJ, where I disagree with you, don't compare what I feel to what Doggy feels. Doggy and you were having an entirely different discussion than you and I were having. What I'm talking about is because of the way the game is officiated and because of their willingness to, as you would say, to adapt to the times and to try to capitalize off of how soft the NBA enforces the officiating to be. That is my issue with today's game compared to games of the past. The stuff that is not allowed by any stretch of the imagination. I'm saying to you, and the average layman is saying to you, because it's important to point out the average layman, not basketball aficionados and stuff like that. But the average layman, JJ, is looking at it and saying, damn, if you're complaining about this stuff, imagine what you would be complaining about back then. Your point is valid, JJ. You're saying, but times change. And the players are adapting to the times that they're in, and that's why they're acting that way. If they were playing in the 80s, they would adapt to that, and they would adjust accordingly. I'm just saying people sometimes look at where we are today, and they say, damn, what would you have been complaining about then? That's all we mean. That's an entirely different argument than what Doggy was making. Me and Doggy are not on the same page in that regard.